right. I'm so excited to kind of cover this. So lots of new things. We're going to start with view sections, nice and easy, nice like little bit of something easy to start with. Then we're going to go to webhooks, and then we're going to do new sync options. We got Joseph. Awesome. Okay, view sections. Easy, very simple, something that folks have been asking for forever. Let's go into my base where I track kind of all of these streams. And as you can see, I'm one of those people who's a prolific kind of view creator. I don't manage them very well. So I've got 30 views or whatever. And so now what you can do is you can create a view section, right? So view sections are a way to group your views together to better organize that sidebar. So what you need to know is when you create a section, it's going to put all of your existing views into more, right? So it's actually quite a bit of work. So initially, when you're going to kind of create your first view section, make sure that you're going to have maybe 15, 20 minutes to organize all of your views. And then you can create what are essentially sections or folders, right? So let's say my first one is going to be, on stream. Those are the views that relate to like moments right before the stream, right? And I've kind of got a bunch of ideas of how to structure this. So let's say I have a checklist, stream checklist that definitely goes into my kind of on-stream grouping. And what's great is I can kind of hide all of those other kind of views, right? So this is one way. So you can create multiple groups. Examples might be, by type. So who it's for. So maybe you have like a designer section and then you have a project manager section. Really, I think this is one of those features that like, unless we needed it, right? It feels like it's so useful. So go ahead and start creating view sections in all of your different bases, but just note, best practice, have like 10 minutes to actually set it up. While we're here, do you want to kind of talk about one other feature that kind of goes unnoticed in terms of view management or view sidebar management is you can create personal views. So let's say you have a large team and you don't necessarily want every single new view that's created to be seen by everyone. What you can do, let's say my YouTube view, I'm the only person who uploads to YouTube. I can make this into a personal view. And now I see it, but folks can turn off other people's personal views. So if you're going to a base with a lot of collaborators and a lot of views, best practice is to have personal views for views you don't expect other people to use regularly, right? Hey, Swanson, excited to have you here. View sec, we're getting started. This is the easy stuff. We're kind of getting warmed up in our Airtable view sections. Very easy, very simple. Personal views, highly recommend. While we're talking about view management, the last thing I will say is that you also have locked views. So these are views that folks get a notification before editing. What this means, if I create a locked view, only folks who can edit views can obviously edit it, but before doing so, they'll have this message. This is great if you have automations based off of views, or you want to create kind of like a best practice amongst the team where you say, hey, if this is a view that's relevant to everybody, let's go ahead, lock that view so that you don't inadvertently change it or things like that. So again, view hygiene, very important, especially as you get many collaborators and many views. So views can only live in one section, right? So you cannot create views in that same view in different sections. However, what you can do is duplicate a view, right? So you can duplicate a view and put it into sections. And that's relatively easy to do. You just do duplicate view and then move it to whatever section you want, but those won't be kind of like joint. So if one view configuration changes, the other won't. Okay, I feel warmed up. I feel like that was like a good new feature. Everyone understands it. It's fun. Everyone gets value out of it. Hey, Chris, good to meet you. Good to meet you. Good to have you here on the stream. Thanks for joining. And you came in right at the moment. We just did view sections. I know you're a big fan. And I took your advice to telling folks that they should have maybe 30, 45 minutes of time to set up all those view sections. Hey, gaming, good to meet you. Awesome. Okay, let's get let's get into the nitty gritty here. Webhooks. So let's go here. We can mark this as done. View sections. Awesome. If folks still have questions around view sections, put them into the exclamation point question, and I'll kind of reference those at the end. Okay, webhooks. So this actually kind of, if you've been on the stream before, one of my favorite kind of, I don't know if functionality is the right word, but webhooks are this ability for services to communicate between each other. So if you're familiar with Zapier, Zapier ability to connect one tool to another is mainly based, or I don't know if mainly is the right word, is this availability of webhooks, right? So when something updates, something happens in one service, they can send a webhook, send that information, and then folks can kind of capture that information, update their own service. So an example of this might be, MailChimp has a new subscriber, or you got a new form submission in Webflow, or you have a new Stripe customer. You can tell Stripe to hey, send this information somewhere to a URL, especially like a website, a URL. And then that other service who's receiving that information can then update information themselves. I know this is very theoretical right now, right? But in Airtable, what this means for folks who are in Airtable, what does the incoming webhook mean for me? It means that you can essentially create custom triggers for your automation. So I'm going to create a custom automation. I'm going to say receive a webhook. Or let's jump into the example. Let's say I want to receive a Webflow submission, right? So Webflow is my kind of website vendor, right? That's where I receive submissions on my website. And Airtable, unfortunately, doesn't have new Webflow form submission. That's not one of the triggers that can trigger this automation, that can put information into my base that's currently unavailable. And what's great about Airtable, and I think no code in general, is that they're always thinking about what are escape valves. What can we offer to the user as a primitive so that they're able to kind of create themselves? So even if we're not going to create the thousands of connections to every tool out there, when webhook received gives you that ability to connect services yourself, right? So even if that primitive doesn't exist, there is this general way of doing it. Kind of an escape valve is how I think about it, to say, okay, well, even if we don't have a direct connection, use this webhook, see if that service has a way to communicate webhooks to be able to share information. So before I jump into, how Webflow particularly works, I do want to kind of show you how webhooks work in general, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just paste this URL. I'm going to open a tool called Postman. And Postman, I'm going to paste that URL here. And Postman is just a lightweight tool to run API calls, right? And a webhook is no different from an API call. And so essentially what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, go to this URL. This is the URL that Airtable just provided me, and do a post call. So there's some options for Airtable specifically. It has to be a post call, right? So you have to send a post and not a get. That's something to keep in mind. Now, if you're not very technical, don't worry about it. Just know that it's a post. And then in that call, we can send a body. We can send some information. So there's some Postman kind of fans in the chat. That's great. So Postman is great for I don't necessarily understand API calls. I don't want to, write a script to run an API call. I just want to put the information from the documentation into Postman, makes it quite easy, and then you're able to run API calls. So this, as someone who's not technical, is a great tool. So I just took that URL, right? I put it into Postman, and then I just sent a little bit of body. So this is the information. Let me make this a little larger here. This is the information I want Airtable to know. So it's saying test. Let's actually put person is Aron. And I could potentially do email. Actually, name kind of makes more sense here. right? Okay, so this is the information that my very simple application wants to communicate to Airtable, right? So I need to, my mini application that lives in Postman, it's going to go to that URL, it's going to do a post call, and it's just going to send this information. So I'm going to send that. And then Airtable returns success equal true, right? So it captured that information, and now it knows that I just sent it name equal Aron and email equal a quorumblet. So if I can run a test, it's captured that information. So it went into the body, it has name and email, right? But there's no, Airtable doesn't know the information it's gonna get. We could send something else that says like, age is 8. I don't know why I'm suddenly 8 years old. And, I don't know, country is Canada. I'm an 8-year-old Canadian, right? And now it got that information as well. So you can kind of start seeing, fellow Canadians, what's up? I know we got Steven, that's awesome. So you can start seeing the structure here that says, okay, you can send any information. So if you're Stripe, you're gonna send maybe how much that client paid, what is their invoice number? And even though we don't have a connection with Stripe, Stripe can still communicate that information to you via this webhook URL. So I'm going to take a moment here and kind of happy to answer any questions about webhook before we actually do a proper example with Webflow and form submission. I'm also going to, my excitement, I got like almost out of breath there. Got excited about webhooks. So, whew. Man, this is so exciting to me. It's so exciting to think of all the tools we're now going to be able to connect. You're totally right, Joseph. I think webhooks plus scripts, it's like if you can understand webhooks at a very basic level, kind of learn how to write scripts, really the world is kind of your oyster here, because you could get multiple sources of information into a webhook or multiple webhooks and then write, this very short script that says like, okay, depending on the information we got, this is what the actions need to be in Airtable. Now, even if you don't know how to write scripts or don't want to know, you can still use webhooks very efficiently anytime there's not a direct connection between Airtable and that tool that you're using. So great question. I don't know if that's plugged or not, but I have a series called Learn Airtable Scripting on my YouTube channel. So do recommend checking that out. If someone could do me a favor of like going and getting that playlist link and dropping it in the chat, I would highly appreciate that. So 2 weeks ago, I dropped a 4-part series where I actually learned how to write scripts with Gio, sales engineer at Airtable, showing me how to write scripts. And that's like, it wasn't fake or anything. I was actually learning how to write scripts during that series. So webhooks plus scripting is, this huge unlock, because now you can take any tool, bring it into Airtable, write scripts on top. But our kind of first goal for today is really just, let's see how we can use that sharing of information. Okay, so we've created a webhook URL. We've tested it out, right? So we know as long as we're sending that webhook in a format, Airtable will be able to receive that and then use that information in future steps. So let's go into Webflow. This is my website, and weirdly, my website has no like Webflow native forms. So I created this page that is just a form submission, right? So if you go and I open this page, it's just a form that says name and email address. And so what we want is that when someone submits this information, we want that information to appear in Airtable. Right now, this just kind of goes into a Webflow backend, right? So let me go into my project settings. I think I have form submissions here. Forms. I can see kind of, yeah, there you go, test. Right, so this was just submitted. This is the form. I don't have anything else. what I'd love is that this information gets automatically piped into Airtable. Now, historically, what that's meant is actually like getting Zapier, creating a trigger that says when new Webflow form submission is submitted, when a Webflow form is submitted, I think is what that is in English. Send that information to Airtable. Now, if you're a developer, you probably feel like that's overkill to have this service that's additionally interfacing between you and Webflow. But now what you can do is just go into integrations. So I went into Designer, I went into integrations, and then I added a webhook. So this is saying what URL, so what trigger, so on form submission, that's what I want to happen. Go ahead and go to this webhook URL, the one that Airtable provided me. Let me find it here. Here we go. Copy paste that, move it over to here, add the webhook. There you go. So this says when any form is submitted on your website, go ahead and ping this webhook. Do a post call and then send that form's information. So if you're a little more technical, it's going to send a JSON with a very similar structure. So name will be test and email will be test@gmail.com. So we've set up that webhook. Let's submit one more time. And it's going to be test2@gmail.com. That's not my name. Test2 is my name. @gmail.com. Right, so your submission has been received. That means that it's sent the webhook. So if I go and test again, there we go, I've received the webhook. I have email. This is structured a little differently. So first they're sending metadata around what form was submitted. So this is saying email form, what site was published. So it's a little bit about the form that created the submission. And then in data are those fields. So I have name and then I have email. So let's say we want to have form submissions submit to this table. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of create the fields here. So name, and then I just want email. Boom, create the field. Let's delete these. Okay, so name, email, done. So we're triggering when webhook receive what we want that automation to do. So you've just received the webhook, there's some data in it. Now we can create a record. So we're gonna go into form submissions, gonna add the name. So this is just specifying which fields we want to change. We're gonna add the field from step one. So this is the information from the webhook. So taking that, going into body, going into data, and taking name. So let's insert that, right? And then the next one is email. That's the only other field that I have. Gonna go into step one, going into body, doing that one more time, going into data, going into email. Okay, run a test. And then we have that submission. So let's click done. Let's turn this automation on. And I will do one, and then I will let you have some fun. Right, so let's submit. This is my name, my email @gmail.com. So did I turn it on? I did turn it on. Submit, right? So that just said, that's instant. Don't even need to wait about it. It's instant, it's already there, right? So here you go. Have fun, folks. You can submit stuff. And so yeah, so that's a webhook, right? Very simple. We just connected Webflow and Airtable. No need for Zapier. No need for manual work. So this is what I mean by that kind of is that that unlock, right? It's that escape valve, because now any service that has webhooks, and there are many. Stripe has webhooks. Mailchimp has webhooks. Most tools out there have this functionality, have webhooks as an option, right? So I do want to talk a little bit about some limitations here, right? This isn't the solve that we want it to be, not yet anyway. So the first thing is that, actually, before I do, any questions? I'm like so excited about this. So any questions about, webhooks before I talk about, what's not possible or what the limitations are today with webhooks or in Airtable anyway. Good time for water. Yeah, that's a good question. So, question for Colleen. So images is tricky because my understanding, and I'm happy to test this, is that Airtable will be able to transfer a URL into Airtable. So let's actually test this. Let's see if I can test. I don't know if on Webflow I'm able to add an upload. So let me see if I can add a way to add an image or a manual upload. I do not think that is the case in Webflow. And now this is really embarrassing because I am terrible at Webflow. Forms, file upload. Okay. Oh. Do I need like a special plan? Oh, I don't have this. Okay, but I could imagine. Okay, so I'll have this set up. I'm happy to answer on Twitter after this. I do think as long as the webhook, if it submits a URL, Airtable will be able to turn that URL into an image that's fully hosted. Let's test it out. Let me do something really weird here that I'm going to see if it works. So let me go to my Twitter page. Let's take this image, copy link address, and then let's do that one more time, copy image address. So I know that this is a kind of wholly hosted URL, right? And let's add as an option like image. And okay, let's go into attachments. We're veering off. I've not done this. This might work, this might not work, right? And because webhooks are flexible, I can create a new webhook that is, image. Choose trigger when webhook received. Let's copy that. Let's go into Postman. Let's change our URL, right? So it's our new webhook. Now let's go image and put that URL, the URL of the image that I just purchased, that I just got, right? So if I'm submitting a file, I would imagine that, Webflow has to host it somewhere, and that my assumption is that in the webhook, they would also send that URL. Those might not be true. I don't know. My hosting plan does not allow me to figure that out. So I'm sending that URL. I can press send. That worked. So in Airtable, if I run the test, it should just have URL, right? So image this at URL, and then I could do add action, create record, form. I want it in form submission. And then in attachments, image, I want the URL. Maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. No promises. So let me run the test. Oh, it works. Cool. So there you go. So if, woo, I think we can do a success for that. So Colleen, drop a success. I think as long as Webflow sends the image, awesome. I'm excited. I'm excited that worked. I was a little worried that it wasn't going to work, but it worked. So essentially, as long as any service sends the attachments as a URL, right, that's hosted somewhere else, which I imagine is the case, you can then pipe that into Airtable by just taking the URL from the webhook into Airtable directly. Cool? Yes, we did it. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, let's, do we feel like webhooks is good? Oh, limitations. I forgot about limitations. Right. Sorry for the clap as well. Limitations. So a few things that you need to know. So imagine, this is a good example. So this is actually a limitation of Webflow, is that in the webhook that they send, they tell you at the top which form is being submitted. So you can't say for this form, send this particular webhook, so you can structure the information consistently. So imagine I had a form that had completely separate information that I wanted to route to another table. That you can't do with this structure. However, what I mean by this structure is, let's say we had a second form that submitted, age and country, and I needed name and email. I can't within this automation say, well, if it's age and email, update these other fields, update this other table, because all form submissions from Webflow submit to one webhook. That said, you can run scripts, right? So let's say you want to route to a different table depending on which name, which form is being submitted. You can write a very simple script that says, if email form, create a record in this table, otherwise create a record in another table. If folks find that interesting, maybe I'll do like a webhook specific stream where we'll call it like, don't rely on other services and just use webhooks all the time, right? So that's limitation number one. So limitation is that depending on how the webhook is structured by that service, you may not be able to route it accordingly in your table. Limitation number two is that, and this is, I think, the final one, is that this has to be a post call. So if I take this URL, put it into the browser, which runs a get call, right, and I go test 1, 2, 3. What I would love is that this would, submit to Airtable, but it returns a 404 because it expects a post call. So this is why here, if I turn this into get, it's going to return an error, and a nondescript error at that. So if there are any Airtable product people, a little bit of description would be great. Cool. Okay, so those are the kind of two limitations broadly of Airtable webhooks today. One is like, depending on the service, you might have to, if they don't have very granular webhooks, you might have to write scripts. And then second, it requires a post call. So, cool. Are we feeling confident to go on to sync? Two types of sync I want to talk to you guys about. Boom. Check. Incoming webhooks. Sync. Chris, what's your favorite type of sync? Tell me, should we do external sync first? Should we do multi-source sync? Should I even do an intro into sync generally? In sync. Intro? Cool. Okay. And then would you rather I continue into multi-source or external first? I'll do both. Multi-source? Cool. Okay. Awesome. All right. So sync, let me just talk generally about what sync is. Sync is the ability to share information across Airtable bases. So initially, until we launched external sync, Airtable sync was this ability to say there's information in base A. Can we reflect that information in base B to create a one-way sync? What that means is that if folks are changing something in base A, those changes will be reflected in base B, but you cannot edit things in base B that will be reflected in base A. And this sync was kind of only with Airtable bases or across Airtable bases. So let's start with a very simple example. Let's imagine I have project overviews, and then I will have project 1, project 2, project 3, and project 4. And I'm starting from scratch just because I like to keep things very simple in terms of, so to do, in progress, done, in progress. And then let's say I have tasks or action items. Create empty table. And then action item 1. Oh, that did not. There we go. Action 2. Action 3. And let's say I want the status of those projects to be reflected in another base. Right, so let's just associate these. So action items. Sorry, I know this is like the boring part of my stream, or anyway, I find this but it's a necessary one. It's a necessary boring part. So action item 2. Let's put 2 like that, like 3. Great, okay. Yeah, okay, boring stuff over. So let's imagine that the status of these projects is relevant somewhere else. Let's say the sales project, they want to, let's call this marketing projects. Let's call this sales projects. For instance, right? So you've got 2 project bases and the sales team would love to have oversight, not the sales team, would love to have visibility into kind of how your projects are going. So you can create all projects view, create a shared view, create a shareable grid link. Allow data, this is very important. This is what is going to enable things to be synced, right? And we're going to create a sync table. So sync data from Airtable base, choose a shared view. Oops, I'm just going to copy paste this right here. Next. And I'm just going to go, okay, go ahead and create that sync table. So now, anytime something updates in the marketing kind of project base, so let's say this is done, and I'm going to sync now. This happens every 5 minutes on your end. You can see that project 2 updates the done, right? So very simple sync. We're sharing information across tables. Examples where you might use this, maybe a list of employees might want to be shared across bases. Objectives might want to be shared across bases. Content that's being created across the org, you might want to share that information. So sync is a part of Airtable's platform, extremely useful to share information across different bases. Now, naturally, you might say like, well, Aron, I have as, I don't know, maybe you're the CEO, you're the whatever, project management officer, and you've got sales projects, and you've got marketing projects, and you've got customer support projects, and you'd like to get one base, one table that aggregates all of those. So aggregates those different sources of information to have one base that is like your projects base. So you can get oversight into the status of everything. Another example might be, everyone has their own employee list or list of vendors, and you want to aggregate that information into like a master list of vendors, a master list of invoices. I don't know. Tell me what you want to create a master list of in the chat, and I'll use that as an example. But what's important is that you want to aggregate information. So there are information across different places that you want to aggregate into one place. And that's what we're going to call a multi-source sync. So shared views, you can share. So this is a question from Chris, which is, if I share a view, can that person sync it to their base? And the answer is yes. So if I drop this link into the chat and you open it, you can then click use this data and then create a synced table, right? So that means whenever Chris updates information from their shared view, it'll be synced to your base. So this has no kind of limitations on workspace. So what I mean by that is if you decide to make that shared view publicly available, syncing is also publicly available. So some pretty niche stuff there. So if you have like a list of resources that you want to share or have publicly available that folks can sync from, it's just a question of turning on and off this option right here. And that then becomes available. All my base belongs to you, Chris. So with that, okay, let's talk about, so multi-source. So multi-source is, imagine I want to create a project space that has both the marketing projects and so let me call this sales projects. And what you'll notice is that they have in common like a name and a status, action items. Or maybe I'll do like some action items here as well. I don't want to go through like creating a bunch of fields, but I think you'll understand as I create that multi-source sync, how do you go about adding information? What are things you need to know? So let's imagine I want marketing projects and sales projects in one base to give me oversight over both of those. So I have my shared view here. So this is sales projects. I'm going to call this all sales projects. And here I'm going to call this all marketing projects. So I have project 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's actually, I'm cheating here. Let's call this project 1. Project 2, project 3. Okay, so now let's create a new base that is like all projects, like a real oversight base. I'm going to go into my workspace here. And I'm sorry, I have many, many bases. So we're going to call all projects. And so let's go ahead and first sync data from. Let's go to one of those two bases. So let's go into the marketing projects. Let's share that view. Let's get the URL. So I'm importing the marketing projects like that. All fields. Let's actually specific fields. I don't want action items. I just want name and status. So create that table. Now I have project 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice I still can't edit this information. All of this comes from here. All right, so if I sync now, you'll notice that that will update. There you go. But I have my first place, the first place I want to sync from. Now, ideally, what I'd love is to have these sales projects in this base as well, right? I don't, I say this and I feel like it's not important, but it is a huge deal because it's such an important use case where you have a bunch of teams working on different things and you want to have the ability to oversee it all without necessarily creating 10 tables, right? Because otherwise I would have to have a project, sales marketing projects, all that. So let's go ahead and click down, add records from. It is huge. I think if you spend time in Airtable or any tool, to be honest, like this is so big. Like it's such a mental shift, to be able to say, I'm just going to pull all of this information into one. So let's add records from and then use Airtable base as our source. Now you can already see where I'm going to go with this in a little bit, but Airtable base. So it's saying, okay, where do you want to add information from? So I want to go to sales projects. I'm going to share this view, take that URL, boom, add that in. And here, the difference with my first sync, it's saying, well, how should I map the fields, right? So there are fields in that sales project base, and there are fields in this all projects table, this all marketing project table. How do I map which one to one? For us, it's simple. We're keeping the same name. So let's add the source. And then we have all of our projects in one place. So I'm going to call this all projects. And you notice that it tells us that there are two synced tables. So now whenever either the sales project, so let's say I update this to in progress. So this is project 1. And I kind of sync this. You'll see that update. Now, a few issues that I want to kind of get to, not issues, but things to think about, right? So the first thing is that if you're sourcing multiple tables into one, everyone needs to have an understanding of what their structures are, right? So, it's kind of confusing now because I have two project ones. right? So a good best practice here is actually to go into the bases you're sourcing from and kind of, let's say we'll call this project name, and then it's going to be a single line text, right? I'm just going to copy paste the name of those projects. And just so you're kind of that person who's aggregating from your base is aware of what's in it, let's go ahead and call this a form. This is going to be, so name is fine. It's going to be a formula field, and it's going to go project name, and then add, so ampersand to say concatenate. I want a little line that says marketing. So that's one way of doing this. So if I save that, I now know that it's a marketing project, right? I can sync that. So if I resync this manually, right, I have that as a additional differentiator. So I know the difference between project 1 and project 2. And I could do the same thing here. Now, however, I'm like just escalating the issues, not the issues here, but kind of things to think about, right? This, I can't group by the department, right? So if that's important at the aggregated base, even though it doesn't necessarily make sense at the individual table level, well, you may want to say, okay, well, I want to create a kind of single select here. Or what you can say is, department. There's going to be a formula field that says, if find marketing in the name, right? Say that it's marketing, otherwise it's sales. That's one way of doing it, and now you can group by department. So I'm sorry, this is gonna be like a weird thing where I can give you a bunch of different ways of doing this. The challenge here is you can't necessarily create a Kanban view, even though these are kind of like single selects. So what I would recommend is you actually create a single select at the kind of base level. So department, and you'll have a single select, and this is just always going to be marketing. I don't know, Joey, do you feel like this is like the best way of doing this? I don't know, there are multiple ways of doing this. So here I can just say and department. I can save that. I can do the same thing in sales. So we're going to do department, single select. It's going to be sales. Save that. Boom. Cool. And then I can aggregate both of those into a new field. So let me delete this field. Right, and we're going to go ahead and edit, update sync configuration. I want to here edit synced fields. Let's go ahead and add department, sync to a new single select field, save that. Then same thing here, edit synced fields and sync department to the existing department. Sync now, right? And now I can create these kind of cool Kanban views by department and things like that, right? Yeah, no, I agree, Joey. I think this is a good. So what's important here, I think when you're working with multi-source sync, I think the most important part is now you need to coordinate across bases. Whereas before you can just say like, hey, however you like to structure your data is fine. I'm just going to sync it into my base and I'll look at it however I want. However, when you have multi-source sync, you need to have, I don't know if standardization is the right word, but you need to know that like, hey, this single select from your table maps to that single select in this other table. And you need to have, that mapping properly done. Another example of this, and I promise this is where we're going to end here because I could talk about this for days, is that let's say your single select options are not consistent across your two bases. So let's say I have a new kind of single select is, instead of to do, it's backlog, right? So let's say our first step in the sales team is backlog. Save, And this is now backlog. This is project 4. And this is a sales, right? And I don't know why green for backlog just doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel right either. Red? I don't know. Colors, field names, it's just all a blur to me. Blue? Sure. Now it's the same as sales, which just irks me, but fine. Now if I sync, you'll notice that now we have to-do and backlog, right? Gray. And this is a challenge, right? Because Airtable doesn't know, or in this instance, it doesn't know that to-do and backlog mean the same thing, just like it doesn't know that in progress is different from done. And so you need to coordinate across the bases to make sure that your single selects are named exactly the same across those different bases, so you can aggregate and have a consistent view of what status each project is in if you want to compare them, right? I know it might feel like a little bit of work to say like, hey, you call backlog instead of to do, but actually in doing that process to provide oversight, you're probably also going to have like better coordination across teams, right? So it's kind of cool to know that you all have the right definition of backlog because you're creating that true single source of truth or oversight across these different bases. So multi-source sync is just phenomenal. It's great. And what you need to think about is like, it's still one way. So I cannot say like, update the department or update the status. So there is no two-way sync. So Airtable had one-way sync from base to base, right? So you could create a separate sync table. Now the second step here is aggregated sync. It remains a one-way sync. However, the difference is that you can now aggregate multiple sources into one sync table in one base that captures the information across these different tables. Whereas before you would have a marketing project table, a sales project table, and you couldn't kind of view all of that information at once. So the answer is no, there's no two-way sync. If your next question is it going to happen? I don't know. I hope so. It'd be great. It'd be cool. But I only show things that exist. But when it does exist, I'll be back on the stream. Make sure you follow. I think now's a good time to tell people to follow so you get notified when I show off two-way sync if it does come. Cool. Any questions before where is my original base? My original base is, here we go. Cool. All right, so we did multi-source. Now let's do external sync. Man, so many things. So many cool stuff. Okay, so just like webhooks, any questions before I jump off? Or jump to the next part of this. Gonna get some water. I'm gonna breathe. It is fun. It's great. I really think this is such a powerful feature. It gets different teams using Airtable to standardize and give oversight, which is a huge challenge when you have multiple people working in different ways and you need that kind of true single source of truth. Maybe you have an asset list, right? So designers are creating assets in different bases depending on their use case, but you want to aggregate all of those to at least have like, here's every asset that we've created. Maybe it's title production or CRM or list of clients or payment. I don't know. There's so much you could source from, and I'm looking to all of you to like expand on this. So I know we're almost bumping up on time here. I'm going to need to maybe check in and check out for equipment. That's totally right. Great example there. I do want to do quickly external, and then I'll let you folks go. Okay, so far we've been syncing from Airtable to Airtable. But imagine that instead I wanted to sync from another source. So I've been syncing Airtable base. Now Airtable base has been that source, but when you think about it, like in a relational database, it could sync from any source. Salesforce is a relational database. Google Calendar, if you format your information, has a title, it has information that you can put into a table. In my case, I want to sync from Box, primarily because I use Box and I don't want to import all of my Google Calendar. I don't actually use Box. I use it primarily for the stream. So let's go into Box, right? I've already connected my Box account. And it says, what folder do you want to sync from? So I created this stream. Let's click choose. And what it's going to do is going to create a record for each file in that folder. Click next. All fields. Let's create that table. And now I have the path, what type of file, how big it is, who's the owner, when it was last changed, file extension, the size, the root folder. I have a link and I can even click and open in Box. So I don't, hopefully, I think this is, there we go. That's an image I took of, a new fancy, next week, we might go into 4K or 1080p with a new camera, hopefully, if things go well. So that is external sync, right? But external sync is no different from any other type of sync, right? Because you can then say like, let's add records from, Airtable, right? Like maybe you have a set of standardized files in Airtable that you want to add, information from. And so what this does is that it abstracts these third-party tools into a table and then lets you aggregate them in the same place. So it's actually kind of two primitives in one. The first is multi-source sync, which says that, regardless of what your sources are, could we map them across each other so you can have one table with all of that information? And then second is, any source, whether it be Airtable or another source, can be turned into a table. So it's kind of two primitives that we've created at once. This concept of aggregation and the second, which is this concept of syncing information from other tools. So far you can sync from Airtable. You can sync from Airtable, Jira Cloud, Google Calendar, and Box. So you could aggregate different people's calendars. That's a great example, Chris. So maybe you want to have, everyone has, I don't know why you would do this, but imagine your team, you want to aggregate all of their meetings and then create a meetings table with all of Google Calendar. That might be a really cool way to schedule people, right? So maybe you have multiple employees who need to be scheduled, and then you want to aggregate and see if you have any gaps in coverage, right? And then also you could send to their calendar when that's the case. So if your employees or whatever are not in Airtable and you just want to schedule on, a calendar, and then aggregate that into an Airtable calendar so you have visibility into everyone's calendar, and then see where gaps are in terms of coverage, or to see who's working when. That's extremely useful, and I think that might be a cool stream one day, Chris. We could do that. Ultimately, these two primitives are super strong because it lets you assume that any of these third-party sources become fields in a table, and it lets you aggregate amongst them. So today was a lot of primitives. We did view sections, was not a primitive at all. But then incoming webhooks, which is an escape valve to really not sync, but pull information from any third-party service that does offer webhooks. And I did see in the chat that there was some interest in doing a webhook specific. So maybe, Stripe, Webflow, other tools, MailChimp that we could test and see how webhooks would work with them. And then we did multi-source syncing. And then we did external sync. So I think we should just drop a success because this was a lot. This was a lot to cover in an hour. Anything else? I'm here for maybe 5-10 minutes if there are any questions. But this is what I wanted to show you. Awesome. I'm not sure how long this thing, there we go. Awesome. Cool. Now's a good time for some water. Yeah, no, this was a big month. This was a big month. I don't know if we can, if next month I'm gonna have so much to show, but this was great. Chris, you can always send me a link. You got my. I won't do it on the stream because I don't know what's in that link, but just send me a link and I'm happy to do it right now. Send me the link. Yeah, sure. Send me the link. We can try it. Hey, Diane. Yeah, awesome. So I did not cover how to post to a webhook through a script. Hey, Raymar. But shoot me, I'm not going to do it now, but shoot me, I do know that there's an existing script that you could pull from, right? So just shoot me a tweet and I'll get it to you. Yeah, so here, Chris, you want me to sync from this? Sure, I can sync from this. Let's sync. There you go. Doesn't allow data to be synced. You haven't given me the permission. Sorry, Chris. Yeah, so data, we can do that in the future, which is just running oops, what am I doing? I'm trying to do two things at once. Here you go, Chris. There you go. Thank you for the emojis. And now when you update, you can do that. So last question is, how can you send a webhook from Airtable? You're right that would require a very short script. Data, send me a tweet and I'll get you the exact code, but it's essentially like a couple lines of code that you can say, when something happens, run a script, and that script will be like a remote fetch, I think, or fetch. Yeah, it'll be a fetch. You don't need the remote, and then just the webhook that you need and the type of call, and you'll be able to do that. So I'll send you a cool script. Cool, awesome. Okay, well, this was Automate All the Things. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow on Twitch. I do this every week. Next week, actually, I do it next week. I'm on vacation. And then the following week, we have Emily from Voiceflow, where we're going to build a voice app without code. So Emily is going to hopefully show us how you can create in an hour or a little more a voice app that says, when is the next Automate All the Things? And it goes into an Airtable base, gets that information, and responds, it's next week. And that week we have XYZ guest. So that's what we're doing next week. I think the week after, we're going to have Data Fetcher talk about, using OAuth for external syncing. And we also have Run Alloy to talk about e-commerce. So yeah, make sure to follow to get notified. And I'll be uploading this to YouTube, Automate All the Things, tomorrow. So if you ever miss a stream, it all happens on Automate All the Things YouTube. Cool. Well, folks, always a pleasure. It means a lot that you're joining, and I hope to see you next week not next week. I'm off next week. In 2 weeks. So always a pleasure. Thanks, Colleen. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Raymar, for jumping in. Zaga, appreciate it. Joseph, Joe, Joey. Just reading names. Cool. See y'all in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.